Welcome back to the Buddhist Psychology Podcast. I'm Lisa Dale Miller. Most of us have experienced moments of clarity, like clearly knowing the right choice or best option, or sometimes what is definitively unacceptable. And then, right on the heels of that clarity comes a crashing wave of doubting thoughts, washing away sure knowing like a sandcastle on the beach. Infuriation is normally what I feel when I find myself seesawing between mental clarity and doubt-induced mental confusion. It's very human, but there are people who spend most of their mind moments lost in obsessive internal doubting. And if you are a psychotherapist, I'm sure, like me, you've had many of them show up in your office desperately seeking relief. This episode explores, from a Buddhist psychological perspective, doubt and its archrival, discerning wisdom. The Buddha conceptualized doubt as one of the 5 mental hindrances. Because emotional disquiet often accompanies doubt, the chaotic mental activity of doubt undermines wise choice-making and timely, judicious action-taking. Doubt can also overwhelm the heart, turning courage into a timidity that feeds abandonment of what a person knows they must do. If we just consider those 2 forms of doubt, it could be said that much of what patients work on in psychotherapy is no more than the surface agitation arising from these kinds of underlying mental habitual doubting. To further flesh this out, let's look at 2 similes from the Pali Canon, the recorded teachings of the historical Buddha, which beautifully illustrate this point. The first simile describes doubt as a hindrance. A traveler walks through the desert obsessively worrying that he will encounter robbers. His mind continually vacillates between real safe experience and mentally doubting his safety. At the mere sound of a twig or a bird, internal anxiety and doubt arise, telling him the robbers have come. The traveler moves forward a few steps and then fearfully stops or turns back. All the while, no harm can be found. Crossing the wilderness in this manner overwhelms him with mental suffering, and his swift and safe arrival is hindered. The Buddha concludes this simile by saying, in this way, skeptical doubt is like traveling in a desert. The second simile describes abandonment of doubt. There is a confident and heedful traveler who, with her luggage in hand and well armed, travels through the desert. If robbers see her even from afar, they take flight. Crossing the wilderness in this way, the traveler reaches her destination and rejoices in her safe arrival. Similarly, seeing skeptical doubt as a cause of great harm helps one abandon it. In this way, the Buddha compares the abandonment of skeptical doubt to reaching a place of internal safety. I think any clinician hearing that comparison would agree it is also our highest best outcome for any patient we work with, that they abandon skeptical doubt and reach a place of internal safety. Particularly those people who come suffering from what I call reified ego doubt. I'm sure if you're a clinician, you've had a patient insist with great surety, nothing ever works out for me, I can never do anything right, life hates me. These thoughts are a manifestation of what I call negative self-cherishing, putting oneself in the middle of all bad things that happen. Though such negative self-cherishing is nothing more than a distorted self-narrative of doom and failure, it is the outcome of a deeply reified false view of self and world. I've seen so many patients suffer for years, not realizing the reified ego doubt they have vociferously clung to was never true, and their healing depends upon its abandonment. I will devote a future episode to the harm of false narrative making, but if you're interested in learning more about negative self cherishing, I've provided a link in the show notes to a chapter I wrote on this topic. Now I'd like to discuss the support of discernment. Discernment is the archrival and antidote for all forms of doubt, including reified ego doubting. Though discernment requires mental clarity, it is more than just mental clarity. Discernment is the capacity to recognize the difference between judgments, opinions, and reasoned deductions. A mind lost in reactivity has difficulty discerning the difference between truth and false assumptions. As I stated in the last episode, it is perceptual ignorance that makes autocracies and dictatorships possible. Additionally, it's extremely important to understand that discernment is not non-judgmentality. Discernment requires circumspection, deliberation, and heedfulness. Non-judgmentality is just an open stance without penetration. So, Buddhist psychology would never endorse taking a non-judgmental stance toward lawless officials hijacking a government whose proper functioning requires adherence to the rule of law. Instead, fierce compassion, vigilant recollecting, and ethical conduct would be a Buddhist psychological prescription for defending our republic from harm. The Buddha offered 3 ways one can develop discernment and aim the mind toward awakening: listening, contemplating, and purifying the mind's perceptive lens. To enact and expand the skill of discernment, the Buddha encouraged practitioners to associate with people of integrity, listen to his teachings, and apply them diligently in daily life. He also insisted that discernment will lead to contentment if one practices non-harming through acts of generosity, virtue, and universal goodwill. These wholesome activities exercise the muscle of discernment because they show us with great clarity the value and importance of what we input and output. Because all actions have consequences, many of which can never be known, discernment forces us to deliberate carefully and be heedful of what we do, why we do it, and contemplate the results as best we can. Wise view and wise intention are the engines of discernment, and discernment is the oil for awakening to what is known in all 3 Buddhist yanas as discerning wisdom. So what is discerning wisdom? Trungpa Rinpoche defined discerning wisdom in the following way. He said, when the mind is purified, then you have developed the wisdom that realizes all things as they actually are. That realization is known in Theravada Buddhism as suchness. The Buddha often mentioned contemplative practice as a foundational way to allow discernment to evolve into discerning wisdom of suchness. That evolution is critical for powerfully enacting fierce compassion in the world. And this is due to the fact that discerning wisdom is a basic component of awakening. When it comes to the kind of discerning wisdom that fuels fierce compassion, that is best expressed through the cultivation of unfabricated well-being. This is an inner contentment, irrespective of causes and conditions. On the path of awakening, fierce compassion can inspire and guide us to unconditioned or unfabricated well-being by acting from generosity, virtue, and universal goodwill. How else do we develop discerning wisdom? The most important contemplation is recognizing the difference between mental fabrication and the actuality of experience. I use this intervention with patients during our sessions by inviting them over and over again to rest mind in phenomenal experience while noticing with dispassion the mind's discursive, distorted notions of actual experience. We can try it right now if you wish. I'm going to invite you to visualize a very common and often quite distressing experience for meditators. So imagine you are in the perfect room for your meditation practice and everything's going well. And all of a sudden, the dog next door starts barking very loudly without end. First, imagine what you would bring to a situation like that. Remember, you're practicing meditation. So maybe you would first tell yourself, well, it's impermanent. A dog is barking. But maybe the dog doesn't stop barking. Okay, then imagine the next thing you do. You decide you're going to generate some kind of compassion for this dog. Some people will do it just by feeling open-hearted toward the dog and trying as best they can to not hate the fact that this dog will not stop barking. Other people might allow their mind to come up with some likely scenario. Maybe there's a scary animal and the dog is trying to get someone to pay attention and bring them inside. Or maybe the dog is just seeing a squirrel. Maybe the dog just wants to come inside, but whoever's in the house isn't listening. Or maybe there's no one home. This dog, too, is suffering. And then the dog just keeps barking. So at this point, one of the things I would recommend is some effort to just hear the sound, to let the awareness drop just into the basic sound of barking and notice what the mind does with it. You can imagine this right now, or you can also try this with any experience that you might be in the midst of. Some phenomena coming in through one of your five senses. It is not something that you can make happen or stop from happening. And maybe you're in a situation where you can't get away from it either. So you decide, okay, I'm just going to bring my awareness into hearing and just notice sound itself. Now, some people might experience an immediate relief of all of the discursive narration about the sound and be able to just hang out with the sound, knowing it as it is, without any mental elaboration on it. Many of us might find that difficult. However, this is a moment where, because the invitation is just to rest in sound itself, what quickly becomes apparent is the mind generating all kinds of stories about how this is disturbing my meditation, and this is so terrible, this is never going to end, and why is it I always end up having a terrible meditation because of something out there that I can't control. And a person can literally just watch the mind elaborating. This is the mental fabrication that the mind can do when it is distressed about a basic phenomena that's occurring that cannot be changed. And it's a beautiful lesson in how the phenomena itself of the barking dog is not pleasant. On the other hand, it's not a disaster. It's not the narrative of catastrophe that minds often bring to experiences that are just basically unpleasant. Even though this isn't a particularly pleasant experience of meditation, this can be an unbelievably powerful experience of wise discernment. The difference between what the mind is narrating about the barking dog and the actuality of the barking dog. And while this may sound very mundane to some of you, this is a key moment of awakening for many people who've never been able to do something like this. I often think about the patients over the years I've worked with suffering with chronic pain. The liberative moment of just resting awareness in the physical sensations as they really are, and noticing the narrative that the mind is coming up with about the sensations and how different these two things are. That the thing they've been calling pain may actually just be some heat, or it may be some tingling, or it might be even something like some pressure or stabbing. And yet, it's not nearly as bad as the story the mind has been telling them about the sensation itself. And so, discerning wisdom is liberation from suffering. And because discernment can be mercurial and not show up on its own when we need it, it has to be trained and developed into the faculty of discerning wisdom. So one can rest in the sublimity of suchness, the way things actually are, in the midst of all kinds of causes and conditions.